Hi, this is Khalil Golivala. Welcome to another episode of the BIPOC Manager podcast with us. Today we have Jeremy Schifeling with us. Jeremy has devoted his career to helping others succeed in theirs. From teaching kindergarten in Brooklyn to recruiting top students at Teach for America to leading education marketing at LinkedIn, he's touched the lives of millions of people at every stage of their careers. Along the way, he's published a best-selling LinkedIn book on Amazon, as well as Career Coach GPT, serves as a career coach for military veterans at Shift.org and MBA students at the University of Michigan, and has produced the most viewed video in LinkedIn's history. He currently leads marketing at Khan Academy and shares his thoughts on jobs on jobinsiders.com, a site for anyone who wants to build a better career in life. Now, the reason why I got Jeremy with us is because not only does he get LinkedIn, not only does he get the job search and job hunting process, but he's just put so much of content out there and is just such an incredible person. Jeremy, thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me, Khalil. This is a real pleasure.
Thanks, Jeremy. Jeremy, I want to maybe start by saying, considering your journey from teaching to leading marketing at Khan Academy, what lessons have you learned about resilience and perseverance that you believe would resonate with BIPOC individuals facing unique challenges in their career paths?
Yeah. This is such an interesting question because really, I think everyone, when they start their career, has been fed this myth that you're supposed to know what you're going to do with your life at the age of 21. You're going to choose a major, you're going to be a professional in that field, and you just go from there. And the reality, now that I'm someone sort of mid-career, is that careers are long and winding. So as an example, when I was 21, I thought I was going to be a kindergarten teacher for the rest of my life. I thought that's what I studied in school. That's what I was doing. Bam, my life was set. And then what I learned is that, number one, I sucked at teaching. And number two, I was actually really more excited about doing stuff behind the scenes. So I had this really interesting experience early on working for Teach for America. And I was doing all this stuff with Excel and pivot tables and marketing. And I was like, wow, even though I didn't know about this a year ago, this is the kind of stuff I love doing. And so one of the big pieces of advice I can give to your listeners is, number one, don't feel like you have to commit to something early on in your career. And number two, you should expose yourself to as many experiences as possible, ideally hands-on experiences, not just academic experiences. So that way you can see what really fits you. My fundamental belief is that we all have different gifts, different strengths. And so it doesn't make sense to sort of fit ourselves into these cookie cutter paths until we at least know what's out there. And so for anyone who's listening, just know you have my permission, you have Kilia's permission to explore widely, find that right thing, even if it's not the first thing that you assumed you were going to do at age 21.
Yeah. I love it, Jeremy, because I think, at least if I can speak for my career and those around me, I feel like the first career ends up being something you kind of fall into. A question kind of like your skills and kind of what the market needed. But it's that second, third career when you're more intentional about it, you've already got experience, you've tried, you got your hands on experience. I feel like that ends up being something that you're more passionate about and you actually put more energy into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we don't really appreciate is all the stuff we don't know when we're first coming out of university. So, for instance, if you were to ask your average 21-year-old, what are the jobs in the world? They would say, doctor, lawyer, scientist, business person, whatever that means. And then you realize out there in the world, there are all these different flavors. Like in tech alone, there's at least a dozen jobs that you don't need to have a coding background for, but no one's ever heard of. Things like biz ops, corp dev, PM, PMM. What are all these things? No one teaches you about that in school. But then you get out there in the world and you're like, wow, some of these jobs are really interesting. Some are a really good fit for me. And so I think one of the best things you can do early on in your career is, again, expose yourself, but also just reach out. Like one of the coolest things on LinkedIn that I always recommend is my team built this thing called the alumni tool, which if you go into your school's page on LinkedIn, so if you look up University of Toronto or XYZ school from wherever, you will see a little tab that says alumni, and it will show you thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of alumni and all these paths you've never even heard of. And if you were to reach out to an alum and say, what does it mean to be a product manager? What does it mean to be an account executive? You're going to learn so much more than just focusing on the narrow path that school gives you.
I guess, Jeremy. So it seems like, again, I think it comes back to sort of your book as well, sort of on LinkedIn, is that it's not just about, let's say, learning those skills or tools helps you understand who you are, but it seems as if networking and talking to people also lets you know if something's a fit is something is a fit for you or not. Could you talk a bit more about that? Sort of, networking to understand if something's a fit for you or not.
Yeah, and so I just want to sort of destigmatize the word networking, because I think when people hear that, especially if they're an introvert like me, they immediately cringe. Oh, networking, so painful, so awkward. I'm going to have to go to some mixer and hand out business cards. And nothing could be further from the truth. The best way to think of networking is following your curiosity wherever it leads. So again, let me start with an example from my own background, and then I'll give some general tips for folks out there. When I was a nonprofit worker in the New York City area about 15 years ago, I was trying to figure out what to do next in my career. And so I started talking to all these people who were doing fascinating stuff, who were working at foundations, working in education. And one of the themes that I realized along the way is so many of them had MBAs. And it was funny because, again, as a young person, I kind of assumed that MBA was for people who wanted to work at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, which I didn't want to do. And then realizing that, hey, this could actually accelerate my career in the social impact space was totally mind-blowing. But I wouldn't have known that until I started asking questions and started reaching out. And so if you want to figure out what's right for you, the best thing you can do is, like I said, go to that alumni tool and actually filter by major. Let's say you were like a sociology major from York University or something like that. And you're like, what am I going to do with my life? If you filter for all the sociology alums, you're going to find folks who are working in government, NGO, the tech sector, starting their own companies. And you're going to start to say, hey, that's kind of interesting. How did they do that? And if you want to find out, yeah, you can look at their LinkedIn profile, but even better, do reach out to them, because here's the fascinating part that we don't realize as young people is that as you go along in your life, your focus becomes less on how do I find my place? How do I sort of become successful myself? To how do I pay it forward to the next generation? There was this famous psychologist, Eric Erickson, who actually defined this term called generativity, which is as you hit that midpoint in life, laying that foundation, leaving that legacy is more important to you than your own personal success. And so if you reach out to an alum, even if they seem super successful and super scary, I guarantee you they have that generative impulse to want to help out the next generation. All you've got to do is reach out to start that conversation.
Yeah. And Jeremy, there's something there I want to kind of unpack with you, because and that focus on sort of connecting with alumni, I find it's advice a lot of people give to, let's say, high school students, people doing university. But in some sense, no matter where you are in your career, if you're ever doing a mid-career change, the alumni network's always with you. Are you seeing a reason why? I mean, my experience has been the alumni networks are sort of tapped out as high school, university, but post-graduation, no one seems to talk about it as much. Any perspective on that?
Yeah. So I think that's a big missed opportunity, because the reality is alumni networks come in so many flavors. So yes, the most obvious one is university, but what about the fact that you are an alum of the first company you worked for? So for example, I hear from people all the time, especially working at Khan Academy, who also worked for the charter school network that I worked for in Brooklyn, who also worked for Teach for America, the organization I worked for 20 years ago. And that's just as powerful as where I went to college. The same is true for volunteering. You know, sometimes you'll meet people who say, hey, I also volunteered with iMentor, that really cool mentorship program back in New York. Let's talk about that shared experience and those shared values. So what I would argue to you is that because we are a tribal species, for better or worse, anything that you share in common with anyone else, whether it's where you went to school, where you worked, where you volunteered, people you know in common, that's all fair game and fertile ground for sort of building a conversation around. And you can search for all those things on LinkedIn. So it would be crazy not to do that, especially if you're ever feeling stuck. If you feel like you need to change, there are people out there who are willing to help.
Yeah, Jeremy, and something else actually I've been waiting for this, because you mentioned it, is being introverted. Now, I mean, I'm a very introverted person myself, but I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions of someone's introverted being unable to. There's that stereotype of introverted just in the corner, nursing the drink, talking to the cats, the dogs in the room, but here you are writing, this amazing networking, teaching LinkedIn. Can you talk a bit more sort of like, like what, sort of, was it something you kind of changed? I mean, what do you think about that conception of introverts being unable to network?
Yeah. So obviously the sort of like Bible of this space, so to speak, is Quiet by Susan Cain, who talks all about the sort of secret power of introverts. And I do think there's something uniquely powerful in the networking world, in the career world, because if you're a type A extrovert, maybe a lot of this is just sort of second nature to you. You instinctually want to meet people. You instinctually want to put yourself out there, so you don't need anyone to guide you. But the reality is, for the rest of us, we kind of need a little nudge to get out of the corner of the room, as you mentioned. And I think the really nice thing about LinkedIn that's drawn me back to it, time and again, is that LinkedIn allows you to play to your strengths even as an introvert. So if the idea of walking into a room of 100 plus strangers totally freaks you out, again, you have my permission not to go into that room. Don't put yourself into a situation where you're playing to your weaknesses. On the other hand, if you know that you have really deep, powerful conversations one-on-one, when you have a time to research someone's background and think about your questions ahead of time, well, that's exactly what LinkedIn affords you. The chance to say, hey, I checked out Khalil's profile. I see what we have in common. I see where he's coming from. Now I can start to imagine all these things I'm genuinely curious about. And I have the time and the space to get to know him and get to ask those questions. That's that kind of laser targeted networking you can do on LinkedIn that I think is a better fit for the introverts amongst us.
Nice. I appreciate that. I think it's something which, again, it ends up being this sort of like this story you tell yourself. When someone says the introvert, it's like, oh, introvert, you can't talk to people. You end up putting yourself in a box. Whereas, as you said, it's playing to your strengths. It's those one-to-one conversations where you're taking the time to listen, right, and build up.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to think about, one of the things I want to talk about, sort of, you've talked about how you produced the most viewed his video in LinkedIn's history. Can you share insights into creating the content that resonates with a broad audience, please?
Yeah, for sure. So just to give people a little context, this was a video that my team and I created almost, I guess, 12 years ago now. So it's sort of like ancient history, but it's still the number one most viewed video. And it was aimed at students because when I worked at LinkedIn, LinkedIn had this big sort of existential crisis looming, which is it had just gone public and it was super successful, but it was worried that it was too focused on middle career professionals, VPs, recruiters, all these people who are already out there in the business world. And then meanwhile, students and recent grads were gravitating to Facebook and then later to TikTok. And those companies were going to eat their lunch and steal the next generation of users. So to make sure that LinkedIn stayed relevant to that next generation, my team was tasked with make sure that LinkedIn is accessible and desirable for the newest professionals. And the first thing we found in all of our focus groups, all of our user testing, was everything that LinkedIn was putting out at that time made zero sense. So we had the very first email you got from LinkedIn was upload your Rolodex, and it literally showed a picture of a Rolodex. And by the way, for any Gen Zers out there, go to Google Images, look for Rolodex, see what I'm talking about. But essentially, even in 2012, this made no sense to new grads. It immediately said, this is my dad's site, my mom's site, not my site. And so what we did is we built a welcome video that spoke the language of students and new grads. It said, hey, you just spent the last 4 to 8 years eating ramen, eating cold pizza. You don't want to do that for the rest of your life. How do you level up? How do you make that next step that pays off on all these investments you've put into yourself through education? And the reason it went gangbusters is because nothing like that had ever come from LinkedIn before. In fact, our CEO, Jeff Weiner, at the time was like, I don't know. Are we going to get in trouble because we talked about, rejecting the idea of LinkedIn is just for old guys with heavy briefcases. And he was like, but old guys with heavy briefcases are our best customers. And yet it was just something that really spoke to the zeitgeist of that particular generation in a way that said, hey, LinkedIn may have seemed totally foreign to you, but actually here's a red carpet. Here's a welcome mat. We want you part of our community. And so my sort of taking those insights and then sharing them with your audience, Khalil, is the number one thing you must do whenever you're creating content, whenever you want to tell your story, is don't just focus on what you want to say, focus on who your audience is and what their needs are. And I think if you start with that, you're going to have a way better reception than just sort of standing on your own soapbox, having no one listen to you. So definitely make sure that you start by sharing things that are valuable, that are useful for your audience, and not just sharing for sharing's sake, because Jeremy told you to share or Khalil told you to share. And I think what I've seen even 15 years later is that the things that go most viral for me, on LinkedIn or other networks, isn't when I have, a great update on what I ate for lunch today, but when I build something useful and I give it away. So for example, I built this tool called Profile Bot 4K, which is a combination of what I was learning about LinkedIn, everything I was learning about ChatGPT. And that went completely gangbusters because it spoke to something that everyone was feeling. Okay, I've got to figure out what's going on with AI. The space is going crazy. I know that my LinkedIn profile isn't as good as it should be, but I don't know what to do about it. And because it actually solved those problems for my audience, that's why I think it received a warm reception. So always start with your audience, start with their needs, and work backwards from there.
Thanks. Maybe I'd like to focus on that point. Jeremy, so your most recent book was about career coach GPT. What's interesting again, we're talking not just about Chat GPT, but other sort of AI tools and LinkedIn. Any sense of where that future of AI in terms of career searching, career growth is?
Yeah. So the big sort of opportunity here is not so much what I've been seeing recently in terms of people saying, hey, rewrite your resume instantly with AI, apply for jobs instantly, but instead more the sort of micro experience of everyone who's searched for jobs at any point in their lives, whether they're a student, recent grad, super successful executive, they always come to this moment in their lives where they feel stuck. I'm stuck because I don't know what to do with my life. I'm stuck because I don't know the next move. I'm stuck because I don't even know how to write this resume bullet. And so I think the real power of AI is that, unlike an actual career coach that might cost $100 an hour or more and is only available at certain times for a few minutes a week, AI is always there for us. And so when we're feeling stuck, when we're like, I just don't know what to do, you can now turn to ChatGPT or any of these tools and say, hey, I'm an introvert. I'm an education major. I love to work on pivot tables in Excel. What could I possibly do with my life? Or I have an interview tomorrow at Khan Academy. How can I make sure that I focus on the things that Khan Academy cares about? Because I'm freaking out. And even though the answer is not always going to be 100% perfect, it's going to be good enough and fast enough to get us unstuck and moving towards that North Star in our lives. And so I think that's the real opportunities that everyone in the world now can access the about 95% of the power of a career coach anytime, anywhere, for free. And I think that's revolutionary.
Amazing, Jeremy. Thank you for that. And so, before you wrap up, is there anything that you want to mention? Anything else you'd want to focus on?
Yeah, I would just tell for everyone out there who is feeling stuck, who is feeling like maybe marginalized in the industry you want to move into, or trying to find your right space out there in the world, just recognize that there is so much opportunity in the world. And I think the biggest myth we tell ourselves is this idea that we have no power over our futures. We're completely sort of at the whims of fate. And what I have discovered over the course of my 20-year career is that, yes, we can't control everything. Luck is a big part of it, for better or worse. But inside the moment, when we are trying to figure out what to do with our lives, how to build a resume, how to build a LinkedIn profile, how to get found for opportunity, there is so much we can control. From reaching out to that alum who wants to help, to building a profile that attracts opportunity, to feeling really confident in an interview room because we prepared the right way. And so I would just advise your listeners out there, don't feel unempowered, don't feel stuck, because you actually have autonomy in your life. You can chart your own destiny if you seize this moment and take advantage of these tools.
Amazing, Jeremy. That's amazing advice. And if anybody wants to kind of follow you or get in touch, what's the best way they could do that?
Yeah, so I think the best thing is just go to thejobinsiders.com. I have about a dozen free tools now. So helping you with your profile, helping you with your interview prep, whatever, that really help people sort of find that North Star in the first place and then pursue it with velocity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest today, Jeremy.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And good luck to all your listeners out there.
Thank you.